Industrialization had both negative and positive outcomes that transformed the U.S. with technology and progressive reforms. But it also led to the U.S. intervening with the governments of other countries in order to obtain resources for their newly industrialized country. Welcome to the Industrialization era, the birth of the modern railroad system and several progressive reforms, but also a main cause of imperialism and World War I. In this video, we will begin by exploring the stories of the four men who built modern America: Cornelius Vanderbilt, John D. Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie, and J.P. Morgan. I, Cornelius Vanderbilt, first went into business in the steamship industry. I had many competitors early on due to my fierce ticket price wars, which were necessary for me to become a dominant force in the industry. 30 years later, after making a name for myself in the steamship industry, I started a service that served as transportation from New York to San Francisco. While railroads had not been booming at this time, in the 1860s, I shifted my focus from my successful shipping company to growing the railroad business. I took control over several railroads and created a larger railroad system. This connected all of the small railroads into one network. After a few years of intense business, I controlled 25% of all the U.S. railroads. Throughout Vanderbilt's monopolies, another entrepreneur emerged to work with Vanderbilt. His name was John D. Rockefeller. I'm John D. Rockefeller, creator of this company, Standard Oil. My company was the only oil company that guaranteed refined kerosene, which persuaded people to buy it for safety reasons. To further expand my business, I made a deal with Cornelius Vanderbilt. This deal involved Vanderbilt paying me $1.65 per barrel of oil to fill his trains. This benefited both me and Vanderbilt in that it made shipping rates cheaper and we were able to corner the market. Standard Oil pushed some of my other competitors out of business, leading me to monopolize the oil industry in Cleveland. After negotiating my way to the top, I owned 90% of all oil supply. Vanderbilt was not the only entrepreneur who wanted to go into business with Rockefeller. Leader of the steel industry, Andrew Carnegie, was also involved in a Rockefeller deal.
I'm Andrew Carnegie. I worked the Pennsylvania Railroad under Thomas Scott. While I was his protege, we made a deal with John D. Rockefeller, in which we agreed to ship some of his oil through our railroads. Years later, Scott challenged me with the task of building a bridge that went across the Mississippi River in order to allow transportation from the east to the west coast. This was a difficult task, but I soon discovered that steel was much stronger than normal iron. So my team built the bridge out of steel. Once the bridge was completed, I became the dominant force in the steel industry.
Lastly, we have J.P. Morgan, the banker that Carnegie sold Carnegie Steel to.
I, J.P. Morgan, was one of the most powerful bankers in my time. I financed railroads and helped organize many major industrial corporations. Once the railroad business took off, I was heavily involved in organizing the finances of railroad companies that were struggling. By fixing these issues, I gained control of a large portion of railroad stocks and eventually took control of the railroad lines. In addition to railroads, I also invested in Thomas Edison's electricity. I was able to buy Edison out and take control of his company, which I turned into General Electric. In 1895 and in 1907, I saved America from financial crises by organizing a banking syndicate that loaned over $60 million to the federal government.
While these men led the booming Industrial Revolution, there were downsides to industrialization, many of which called for progressive reforms. Industrialization caused an inequality in how many people were poor over how many were extremely rich. This new era forced those who were not rich into poor living conditions that were unsanitary and crowded. While there were more job opportunities, laborers were working in poor conditions with little pay and arduous hours. People attempted to change this, however, they did not have much say in their government. This led to another demand for reforms. People wanted to limit government power and grant more power to the people. From this, direct democracy emerged, allowing people to recall election officials if they failed to fulfill their roles, and allowing people to vote to remove or incorporate laws they think fit. In addition to the progressive era, industrialization led to imperialism. Because of this new industry, there was a demand for resources. In order to obtain these resources, the U.S. began to expand their territory into countries that produced their desired resources. Part of the reason why the U.S. believed they had the right to expand into other countries was because of manifest destiny. This justified taking over the government of other countries. Although the U.S. claimed to be helping these other countries avoid imperialism, their actions said otherwise. In Panama, the U.S. helped them gain independence from their imperialist, Colombia, but their only intention was their own benefit. The reason the U.S.'s help was so that they could have power over Panama and build a canal for themselves. Another example is in Puerto Rico. After the Spanish-American War, the U.S. gained Puerto Rico as a territory, which should have helped them politically and economically, but the U.S. gave them no say in their own government. The U.S. continued to do this in several other countries, therefore making them main imperialists of the whole world. The spread of imperialism eventually led to World War I. Imperialist countries competed against each other for territory, which caused a war to break out. While at first the U.S. wasn't directly involved in the war, they were sending supplies to Britain, which caused Germany to target the U.S. too. Germany began sinking U.S. ships to submarine warfare, giving the U.S. more reason to enter the war. While it was said that the U.S. entered the war to protect democracy, it was really to protect themselves and gain territory. As the U.S. became more involved in World War I, espionage and sedition acts were created as a way of promoting the war. These laws prevented Americans from speaking out against the war or doing anything that protested the war. These acts contributed to the downside of industrialization because people's civil liberties were restricted. It did, however, bring new job opportunities for women and African Americans, which continued in the 1920s. After the war ended, U.S. foreign policy returned to isolationism, the policy that the U.S. originally claimed to follow. The end of World War I concludes the industrialization era. Through its many ups and downs, positives and negatives, this era forever transformed America into the modern, technologically advanced country it is now.